Good to have you with us. This is the Daily Report for Friday, February 11th here in Korea. We've been talking about changes in Korea's COVID-19 strategy in recent days, but there have also been a number of adjustments in containment efforts elsewhere as well. We have details on that later on in the program. Here first are the global pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start with Korea's tallies for this Friday.
Sunny, we've got a slight drop in infections from the day before as close to 54,000 infections were tallied as of 12 a.m. this Friday, and that's almost 53,800 domestic transmissions and 129 cases from abroad. Now, as I said, it is a slight drop from the day before, but comparing the figure to exactly a week ago, it's actually a figure that has almost doubled in that span. And also the 7-day daily average now stands at above 40,000. And this as we're seeing almost, as we go over to our map, as we're seeing almost 18,000 new infections in Gyeonggi-do province, more than 11,500 in the capital's whole, and just 3 spots in the country seeing triple digits, with the rest of the nation reporting at least more than 1,000 infections on a daily basis now. And with that, Korea has more than 1.2 million in total cases. And also, we're seeing that the number of deaths in the country has surpassed 7,000, as 49 additional people have lost their lives in the past day, which is quite more than the days before. Now, going over to the number of patients in severe or critical condition, that has slightly decreased from the day before, and for the 14th straight day, this number has been in the 200s. Now, there have been a little over 5,800 people who got their first COVID-19 shot on Thursday, and also a little over 13,600 who got their second shot. Meanwhile, more than 201,000 people got their additional dose. With that, around 28.9 million people in the country got their booster shot. Now let's move over to the global figures. We've got an addition of some 2.7 million cases in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time, with a little less than 13,000 fatalities. And in the past day, we're seeing that Colombia has become the next country to surpass the 6 million mark in its total caseload. The U.S. now at 79 million in the past day. And those are the general updates that I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for the global tallies over the past 24 hours. Here in Korea, authorities have voiced intentions to address surging demand for self-testing kits, and Choi Min-jung is here with details on that. Min-jung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so do tell us about the government's plan.
Well, Sunny, South Korea's Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum said during a COVID-19 response briefing today on Friday that officials are considering a price ceiling for rapid antigen test kits. The government has already banned the online sale of test kits from Monday to prevent scalping at marked up prices. Authorities said online bulk sales may lead to unnecessary stockpiling and make the test kits less accessible for ordinary people who prefer to buy them in small amounts. Officials also said offline sales will be limited to pharmacies and convenience stores only.
Right, and staying with these kits, Min-jung, the government is providing them free of charge to individuals in the high-risk category, though.
That's right, Sunny. The government has decided to provide the kits to students and staff at preschools, as well as those in senior care centers. Beginning on the 21st, rapid antigen test kits, enough for 1 or 2 tests per week, will be distributed to some 2.1 million people. Pregnant women may also become eligible to receive their free kits next month, when the current supply crunch is likely to ease.
Right. Meanwhile, on the prevention front, Min-jung, are we looking at possible adjustments to our social distancing?
We are, Sunny. Health authorities are discussing possible changes to our current rules, which are due to expire on February 20th. Officials have suggested that the guidelines may be extended once again, but perhaps with eased restrictions. They will also discuss the fate of vaccine pass mandates once our current social distancing guidelines come to an end next week. This is what Korea's Prime Minister had to say about the matter in a briefing earlier this morning.
It is very important to adjust social distancing to minimize economic and social damage. After closely analyzing and evaluating the situation, we promise to make a bold decision when needed if the number of severe cases and fatalities remains stable and the virus situation can be managed to a certain extent.
Right, a bold decision, meaning perhaps an ease in restrictions, as you mentioned, Min-jung. Meanwhile, what's the latest with regard to Korea's treatment strategy for those recovering at home?
Right, there are close to 4,000 medical centers providing virtual treatment and prescriptions over the phone for home treatment patients as of Friday. Although services are becoming available at more clinics and hospitals with each passing day, there are still regional discrepancies. For example, medical centers that support low-risk patients are mostly concentrated in the Greater Seoul area, numbering around 1,200 as of Thursday. However, regions like Busan, Jeju, and Chungcheongnam-do province have fewer than 100, and in the city of Sejong, only 6. Health officials have promised to significantly expand their home treatment capacity, which is enough to manage 1.3 million people at the moment.
Right, 1.3 million at the moment. Min-jung, let's now include Soa in our talk. So I believe officials have shared their assessment of our current campaign against Omicron, right?
Right, Sunny. So leading on from Min-jung's updates on how medical facilities are managing patients being treated at home, the government had the latest figures on how many patients are currently subject to this home recovery. Now, on Thursday, more than 42,700 people have been newly designated for home treatment. Officials said that around 95% of COVID-19 patients are being treated at home. The combined number of patients that have been categorized by individual municipalities as intensive care patients stood at 8,156 as of Thursday. On the first day, home recovery patients have been divided into 2 groups. In total, more than 177,000 people are currently being treated at home. Meanwhile, as of this Friday, a little over 19% of ICU beds for severe or critically ill patients are being used, so treating capacity for those patients continues to be stable.
Right, and also on this Friday, I understand officials have shared additional measures to protect those deemed vulnerable.
Right, Sunny. So first off, to respond to the surging figures and also to the recently changed testing system, the government will make it easier and cheaper for people to get tested for the virus if they have to take care for elderly or sick people and cannot avoid close contact with them. So let's take a listen to this announcement that has been made by an official.
First, we will draw up disease management guidelines for guardians and caregivers of hospital patients to make sure PCR testing is provided efficiently when it's necessary. Second, we will make sure that guardians and caregivers are paying less out-of-pocket expenses. Up to 1 person who accompanies patients prioritized for PCR testing to a screening center before hospital admission will be offered free testing.
While caregivers for hospitalized patients are being tested once or twice a week with PCR tests at hospitals under a pooling system, an additional guardian, for instance, faces difficulties in getting tested ever since the testing scheme changed nationwide after the Lunar New Year holidays, as those aged under 60 are in most cases subject to rapid antigen tests and not PCR tests. So what authorities are planning to implement starting in the 4th week of this month is let 1 guardian along with a hospital patient get tested together for free and also apply health insurance for preemptive testing at hospitals, because those aren't all free of charge as well. Meanwhile, starting on Monday, elderly community centers nationwide will be temporarily closed, and also in-person programs at senior welfare facilities won't be held. And that, of course, in a bid to reduce chances of elderly citizens getting infected with COVID-19.
Right, I see. And against that backdrop, so do we have any projections on when Omicron might peak here in the country?
Well, it looks like we do not have any recent updates from the government as of this Friday, at least. That's why officials are saying this is why we're having this uncertainty on when exactly and how vaccine pass systems will change, as well as social distancing measures. But officials at the briefing earlier themselves mentioned how the peak is the projections of the peak is changing rapidly, as it used to be the end of February, and then now we're seeing that it looks to continue into March. And also an official mentioned that this peak had been just recently been set at around 100,000, then 130,000, and even beyond 170,000.
Right, and experts are also forecasting even more infections to come. According to one medical expert who's a member of the government's COVID-19 Recovery Committee, daily cases could eventually top 200,000 and stay at a peak throughout March. But at the same time, he also suggested that this may be the last hurdle of the pandemic.
Right, and hopefully he is right, Min-jung. On the vaccination front, do tell us a bit about the rollout of Novavax here in Korea.
Right, Sunny, the vaccine will be administered first to those at a higher risk and unvaccinated people over 18 starting on Monday. High-risk inpatients and seniors at nursing centers will be inoculated on location where they're receiving care by mobile vaccination teams. Other unvaccinated adults can also get jabbed from Monday as well if they are able to book surplus vaccines. Otherwise, registration will begin on the 21st and they will start getting the vaccine on March 7th. People who didn't get their boosters due to side effects from the first 2 doses are also eligible to get a Novavax vaccine as their 3rd dose, but they will need to be approved by a doctor. Meanwhile, another 294,000 doses of the vaccine are being shipped out on this Friday.
And also the Novavax vaccine has been currently given the green light for adults in the UK, Europe, the WHO, and is also under review by the US FDA. And also what the Novavax company has said in a study recently is that it is safe and effective for those aged 12 to 17, and that according to a trial done last summer with some 2,247 US kids in that age group that have participated in that trial, and around 80%, Novavax appeared to be around 80% effective on that age group as well. So it might also be that here in Korea we might have Novavax approved for younger people as well.
Right, hopefully that will be the case. Now, beyond efforts on the vaccination front, efforts to accommodate the voting rights of COVID-19 patients are bearing fruit. Come next week, lawmakers will vote on a bill that seeks to offer those infected the chance to cast their ballots for the presidential race on March 9th. Our Jun-hwan has details in this report.
National Assembly's Special Committee on Political Reform on Thursday approved a bill to extend voting time to 7:30 p.m. from the current 6 p.m. During that extra 1 hour and a half, those infected with COVID-19 will be able to cast their ballots in person. Currently on Election Day, voting is possible for those in self-isolation, but only for those who did not test positive. They can cast their ballots after regular voting ends at 6 p.m. for 1 hour until 7 p.m. Those infected are not eligible due to the mandatory 7-day self-isolation rule. The problem is, with the country's daily infections expected to top 170,000 by next month, nearly 500,000 people could potentially find themselves unable to vote. To prevent that from happening, both the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party had called for parliamentary efforts.
I call for bipartisan efforts to come up with a measure to ensure the voting rights for those under self-isolation, both infected and not infected.
Voting is the most sacred of rights. We must swiftly come up with a measure that people can trust.
The two parties initially suggested extending voting to 9 p.m., but it was revised to 7:30 p.m. in a compromise with the National Election Commission, which said the current 1 hour extension till 7 p.m. will be enough for all those in self-isolation, infected and non-infected. The finalized bill will now be submitted to a plenary session for a vote and will likely be passed without controversy. Jun-hwan, Arirang News.
Right, and once that bill is passed, COVID-19 patients will also be able to partake in the presidential vote. Now, Min-jung, this particular election is not our first amid the pandemic, right? We had the legislative elections back in April 2020, if I remember right.
Right. 2 years ago, those in quarantine could register to vote and cast their ballots on site only if they were virus-free. Their voting took place in the after hours after 6 p.m. when polling stations would close for regular voters. But for COVID-19 patients, they could also vote if they were admitted to a residential treatment center at special polling stations set up there by the government. However, COVID-19 patients at hospitals, for example, were left with no means to vote.
Right. Back then, if you guys remember, Korea had been praised for its prevention measures during that specific election. And also when Korea had its Suneung, its college entrance exam, when also patients and those in isolation could take their test. But compared to during the general elections, the numbers are very different because I want to take you back to that 2 years ago. Then we had around 27 cases, exactly 27 on election day, so a double-digit figure and a single-digit figure of fatalities, 3 deaths on that election day. And now, as we are seeing tens of thousands of cases on a daily basis, it is going to be a different challenge during the presidential elections.
Right, we'll keep our fingers crossed for a safe election this time around then. All right, so as always, thank you. See you on Monday. Minjung, thank you. It's been great having you on. See you soon.
Thank you.
A promising Korean figure skater has written a new chapter in our history of the sport with his skills on the ice Thursday night over in Beijing. Our Kim Hyun-sung tells us how.
South Korean figure skater Jun-hwan on Thursday finished in 5th with a masterful performance during men's free skating event at the Beijing Winter Olympics. No other male figure skater in South Korean history has ranked as high as Cha in the Olympics. Cha is also the first South Korean figure skater in 8 years to rank among the top 5 since Kim Yeona earned silver in the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. Cha performed to the opera song Turandot. Cha opened with a quadruple toe loop but failed to make the landing. Cha fell hard onto the ice, a misstep that cost him 3.8 points in the grade of execution. But he didn't let his early slip-up affect the rest of his performance. The remainder of his time on the ice was performed with grace and mastery, with his unique theatrical style lighting up the rink. He earned a total of 282.38 points, way above his previous personal best of 273.22 points, set at this year's Four Continents Figure Skating Championships. Cha's top 5 finish is also 10 places above his previous Olympic rank, where he finished 15th at the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. The gold went to the American star Nathan Chen. Skating to Rocket Man, Chen superbly executed all 5 of his quads. His unmatched performance garnered him 332.6 points from the judges. Earlier, Chen had set a world record in the short program. Yuma Kageyama and Shuma Onu of Japan bagged silver and bronze, respectively. Yuzuru Hanyu, a 2-time Olympic champion who goes by the nickname the King of Figure Skating, finished 4th. Hanyu attempted a quadruple axel, a technique that has never been successfully pulled off before, but he failed to make the landing and also fell doing his following jump, the quadruple salchow. Although Hanyu does not take home a medal, his willingness to take on the hardest jumps undoubtedly won him even more fans. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Earlier on this Friday morning, finance authorities came together to address both internal and external risk factors to the local economy. As Min Soo-kyun says, priority in the first half of this year will be placed on maintaining stability.
The South Korean economy is on a recovery track, but economic risks remain high. This is according to Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi in a meeting on Friday with the central bank chief and top financial regulators. Hong said that the economy is facing heightened risk from both internal and external factors, such as monetary policy shifts by the U.S. Federal Reserve and growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine.
Economic, inflationary and financial uncertainties are rising amid high volatility in internal and external markets.
Given these uncertainties, Hong said that in the first half of the year, maintaining a resilient economy, stabilizing domestic prices, and managing economic risks will be the country's top 3 priorities. And to do that, the heads of the fiscal, monetary, and financial authorities gathered to discuss ways to coordinate macroeconomic policies. Finance Minister Hong was joined by the Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol, the Chief of the Financial Supervisory Service Chung Eun-bo, and the Vice Chairman of the Financial Services Commission To Gyu-sang. Among the range of issues covered, much focus was given to ways to support the vulnerable, ease financial imbalances, and stabilize living costs amid the pandemic. The four have agreed to work together in their first meeting in 4 months. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
A project here in Seoul centered in the Gwanghwamun area seeks to make innovative use of technology to share Korea's rich culture and history. Our Kim Bo-kyung offers a taste of this immersive experience.
An icon of Seoul City, the imposing main gate that leads to Gyeongbokgung Palace is Gwanghwamun Gate. It shows the history of the Joseon dynasty, but also has much more to offer.
Gwanghwamun Square is no longer just a historical heritage site. Several spots nearby combine the latest technology, including AR, VR, and 5G, to create new experiences.
As part of efforts to cultivate the immersive content industry, Korea Creative Content Agency and the Culture Ministry have introduced a project called Gwanghwa Side, or Age of Light.
In 2019, we commercialized 5G technology, but many wondered about its usage. Immersive content is where this 5G can readily be utilized. And as the Gwanghwamun area represents Korea, we chose this site to fill with content to let more citizens be immersed.
A total of 8 pieces of immersive content using cutting-edge technology are on show across the Gwanghwamun area, with only the last one waiting to be unveiled on February 25th. One of the most eye-catching pieces is Gwanghwamun, a media art exhibition that uses 5G technology. Its ultra-high speed and hyperconnectivity enable visitors to enjoy real-time scenery of places across the country such as Gyeongju City and Wondogun County.
I'm a member of a hanbok-wearing traveling group and got to know about Gwanghwa Side there. I made a reservation and enjoyed the content. It was surprisingly nice and it made me feel somewhat relaxed.
Artificial intelligence is also being used. Gwanghwa-in presents AI figures programmed through deep learning. They provide information on the cultural heritage and tourist sites around the Gwanghwamun area in 4 languages.
경복궁에 대해 알려주세요.
경복궁은 조선 왕조 제1의 궁으로 1395년에 태조 이성계가 창건했어요.
In the center of the square is an attraction ride that feels like it belongs in an amusement park. A panoramic screen with 4D features, riders can enjoy dynamic content on the past, present, and future of Gwanghwamun. Aiming to serve as a milestone in boosting the VR, AR, and AI content industry with the backdrop of a symbolic and historical site, Gwanghwamun invites citizens into an immersive world. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Russia began its military drills in Belarus on Thursday as planned. Footage released by the Russian Defense Ministry showed tanks and missile launchers being used in the drills and military jets in the air at an unidentified location. Reports say Russia is expected to have 30,000 troops in the country, Su-35 fighter jets, S-400 air defense systems, and nuclear-capable Iskander missiles. In response, Ukraine launched its own war games on Thursday. Ukraine's defense minister says the drills will include Javelin anti-tank missiles recently provided to Kiev by the U.S. And speaking of the United States, President Joe Biden, speaking to NBC News on Thursday, issued a warning to any Americans who remain in Ukraine to leave the country. Biden added that there's no scenario where he would send troops to rescue Americans fleeing the country, as it would spark a world war. Meanwhile, the UK government now has the power to impose tough new sanctions against Russia after legislation was passed in Parliament on Thursday. The UK can now impose sanctions on Russian businesses and individuals in a wide range of economic and strategically significant sectors. Footage released by the Libyan Prime Minister's office showed the Prime Minister escaped an assassination attempt in the early hours of Thursday. However, a government source revealed he escaped unharmed despite a number of shots being fired. The attackers fled the scene and an investigation is underway. The assassination attempt comes as the country's eastern-based parliament appointed a new prime minister and called for the interim incumbent to step down, although there is no evidence the two events are linked. Libya's division continues to deepen between two warring parallel administrations that governed from 2014 until a unity government and the current leader was installed last year as part of a UN-backed peace plan. French virologist Luc Montagnier, who won a Nobel Prize for co-discovering HIV, passed away at the age of 89 on Thursday. Years before the onset of the AIDS epidemic, Montagnier made significant discoveries concerning the nature of viruses and contributed to understanding how retroviruses can alter the genetic information of host organisms. He was the director of the World Foundation of AIDS Research and Prevention in Paris. He also sparked controversy in 2020 by saying that he believes the COVID-19 virus was created in a Chinese lab. Switzerland is set to vote on Sunday to become the first country in the world to ban medical testing on animals. The vote comes as animal rights groups gathered enough support to push for a referendum in the country, which hosts a huge pharmaceutical sector. According to government statistics, more than 550,000 animals died in lab tests in 2020 in Switzerland. This includes 400,000 mice, nearly 4,600 dogs, 1,500 cats, and 1,600 horses. Drug companies warn that if such a law does pass, it could lead to the end of new drug development. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
It's time for a weekly focus on issues beyond Korea, and today we turn to neighboring China, where the Winter Games are well underway. I have Jonathan Chang at the Wall Street Journal live on the line. Jonathan, it's good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Right. Now, Jonathan, there's been quite a bit of media coverage about the closed loop that Olympic organizers there have in place to keep COVID-19 at bay. How effective would you say has this stringent strategy been thus far?
Well, I'm living it right now. I've been in the closed loop for about a week, and I can say that it's been so far so good, certainly for those of us in the loop. We know that it comes with limitations on our movement and on what sort of options we have in terms of eating and other things. But in terms of keeping us from getting COVID, I think the daily testing has shown that we still have just a small handful of cases inside the closed loop. And between the closed loop and outside the rest of the country, it's also been pretty tightly sealed as well. So it's sort of kept China's COVID-0 policy in place.
Right. And as you mentioned, Jonathan, COVID-19 tests are being conducted every day within this bubble, so to speak. What happens to those who test positive, Jonathan?
So if you test positive, then yes, life gets a little bit more complicated. I think it varies in particular cases whether you're an athlete or not. But the general event at that point is that you will be put in a quarantine hotel. If you're showing symptoms, that will obviously be more concerning to the authorities as well, and you'll probably be taken to a medical facility. And so that's sort of been the protocol. Thankfully, I haven't been affected by it, and neither have most of the people inside the closed loop.
Right. And staying with that, Jonathan, what happens to those who have come into close contact with those infected? Are they also required to quarantine?
Those who have been put in sort of deemed as being a close contact, they've been told that they need to take 2 times a day, and they're told that they shouldn't take the buses within the closed loop that take you from the media center to different sporting venues. You should instead take taxis. So they have taxis that are inside the closed loop that are just you and the driver with a screen in between, and you're not supposed to eat with others and so on. So you do that for several days, and as long as you aren't test positive or anything else, then they allow you to re-enter.
Right, Jonathan, you're kind of cutting off there. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you fine.
All right. Staying with that, Jonathan, organizers there in Beijing are also facing a list of complaints from athletes, especially those in quarantine. Do tell us a bit about the grievances shared.
So some athletes, obviously this is the big event of their lives for many of them, competing in some of these more obscure winter sports. Many of them have had their Olympic dreams shattered effectively by having a COVID test at the wrong time. That's the case, for example, for Vincent Zhou, an American figure skater. He was able to compete in one event, but has not been able to compete in others. And then you have a lot of athletes who, have been, they've had their training schedules disrupted. They've been separated from their gear and from their equipment. And others, have complained about loneliness and about bad food and about cramped environments. And, for many of them, their Olympic dreams have sort of gone sour, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that because you need to wait 4 years for the next Winter Olympics.
Right. Also, Jonathan, some games I see have been held with athletes adorning face masks. Have there been any reports of perhaps discomforts on that front?
Well, that was, I think, most notable just in one particular case. The Canadian women's hockey team, I believe, decided to play in masks because of concerns about the Russian Olympic Committee team and whether they were potentially carrying COVID. And it turns out that in the end, several of the Russian athletes had tested positive. I think at least one. I'm not sure what the specific numbers are, but it looks like their caution there in terms of wearing the face mask was a good one, but I can't imagine what it was like to play hockey wearing a face mask.
Right. Finally, Jonathan, the Beijing Winter Games, of course, are witnessing their fair share of controversies, to say the least. What appears to be garnering the attention of the foreign media like yourself?
Well, geopolitics is always a layer over the Olympics, even though the International Olympic Committee talks about how we transcend politics at these Olympics. Of course, 4 years ago in Pyeongchang, I was there too, and I'm sure many viewers were watching that as well. And of course, there was the North Korea, South Korea, Kim Yo-jong coming to the opening ceremony. Here, it's a lot of concerns about human rights, especially with the West, the U.S. in particular, but other countries as well accusing China of human rights violations. Then you have sort of that controversy as well as citizenship concerns, because you've had some athletes, change their citizenship. You have some Chinese Americans who are competing for China, and you have some, some other sort of friction and questions around that as well. So those have sort of been the issues that inevitably come to overshadow some of the sporting that takes event here at the Olympics.
Right, and hopefully that will not continue to be the case, though. All right, Jonathan, thank you for making the time to join us live with the latest from the Beijing Winter Games.
Thanks for having me.
Debate over the importance of face masks has been reignited in recent days as Omicron appears to challenge related prevention measures. For more, I have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Dr. Kim, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Dr. Alice Hyung-Young-tan at Ms. Medi Women's Hospital live on the line. Dr. Dan, it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Kim, authorities in quite a few places, including states over in the US, are looking to lift their face mask mandates. Do you suppose the worst of the pandemic is over?
Well, I don't think so. But those decisions actually made on several the background information. The first of all is that they believe that in their condition, the peak of infection is is over in their case, and then many people, especially those countries, well, probably everyone on the globe actually complaining about fatigue about social distancing measures and then some mask mandate over the 2 years. And then also another factor they are considering is the special feature of this Omicron variant. Obviously, this virus is seems to be very contagious, but seems to cause just a relatively just a mild disease. And then the immune status actually has just changes over the 2 years. Now that the people got many people got just immunity, whether it is from the vaccination or some natural infection. So those kind of all the factors seem to just affect the decisions in those specific just countries and the states so far.
Right. And Dr. Tan, face masks, though, have proved to be one of the pillars of our COVID-19 containment efforts, not simply here in Korea, but also over in the US. And having said that, what can you share with us about the related guidelines by health authorities over in the US?
Right, in the US, the CDC, they have made recommendations really for strong mask wearing throughout the country. And these recommendations are based on both direct experimental data and also epidemiological data. In terms of the direct experimental data, they found that when people had universal masking in place, the risk of exposure to aerosols decreased substantially. And also in terms of epidemiological data, communities that had mask mandates in place had decreased transmission levels. The current CDC guidelines state that a person should wear the most protective mask that you can, that fits well on your face, and that you can wear consistently. And they also note that a respirator is a type of mask that has the highest level of protection. And so the CDC, I think they are being very conservative in terms of their mask recommendations. Of course, in public transportation, also people are supposed to be wearing masks at all times.
Right. Back here in Korea, Dr. Kim, officials have said that face masks can be taken off when COVID-19 can be treated like the seasonal flu. How do you interpret these words?
Well, first of all, what they said is that that time that we actually can just take care of all the COVID-19 patients in their local hospitals and the clinics, like we just started to in this just Omicron surge. And then when you actually compare to the flu, just a common cold or flu, that we actually have some annual flu shot, and also we have very successful drugs. So that if anyone just got some flu, there's some system, and then we actually have some full expectation what can be done after just getting the flu. So this kind of things that maybe the managed like the seasonal flu just indicates. And I think, but personally, I think wearing mask is a pretty just a good strategy, not year long, but probably just like a winter season. This is when the many just respiratory viral diseases is rampant, like a flu. So the just wearing the mask, especially in winter season, actually demonstrate that it's actually very helpful, just preventing many just respiratory diseases, like including flu and then other just a common cold. So I think I would probably just advise just wearing the mask, not just a year long, but probably in the winter season. Right. In the future, yeah.
And keeping in mind what Dr. Kim has just said, Dr. Tan, keeping in mind that, are there any venues that, or perhaps people who need to wear face masks as we seek to live with COVID-19?
Right, so if you think about location and persons in terms of where masks are recommended. In terms of locations, of course, any indoor location that is poorly ventilated, enclosed, also crowded, and in a place where you really have a hard time avoiding close contact, these are the places where you should be wearing a mask. In terms of who should be wearing a mask, even if the risk level goes lower, I would say in terms of what we call source control, so anyone who has a diagnosis, obviously, or symptoms of COVID-19 or an acute respiratory illness, they should be wearing a mask at all times. And then, of course, people who are at high risk for developing severe COVID should be wearing a mask. And those are people who have chronic medical conditions, who are elderly, who are immunocompromised. Chronic medical conditions include obesity, heart disease, chronic lung, kidney, liver disease. These are the people who are at high risk, and so I would recommend that they wear a mask at all times.
Right. And Dr. Kim, taking into account the presence of Omicron, what are your words of advice with regard to the lifting of mask mandates in general?
In general, I think maybe for the short-term projection is that, especially in Korea, like after this Omicron surge, and then probably just only in the outside, not just indoors. And it's still just the virus is very just contagious, and especially the place without just a good ventilation, this virus is really just contagious. For the just a long-term projection, well, I do not know. I mean, there are many just variables in addition to this Omicron. We do not know whether any other just the variant might just come with a certain just totally different just features compared to just the previous just variant. So it is hard. I mean, at this point.
Right. And despite your concerns, Dr. Kim, and I'll ask this question to Dr. Tan, of course, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spoken about the possibility of an end to self-isolation requirements in England for those who test positive. Dr. Tan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I listened to the press report, and I listened to his words very carefully, and he did say that it was conditional, that he would consider this if the trend continued. And then also there was a spokesperson for his office who said that that it's not a recommendation that anyone with an acute respiratory disease, COVID or influenza or any other infectious disease, go to work if they're diagnosed, if they have acute COVID. In terms of the trends, it is true that that COVID is on the downturn in the UK. They have 25% decrease in new cases, 20% decrease in new deaths, 11% decrease in new COVID hospital admissions. And so things are improving. However, you run the risk of increasing infection among people who are vulnerable and also among children if you have such a measure as not requiring isolation. Also, we need to consider mortality data. The UK, they have the 6th highest number of COVID deaths per 100,000 people among OECD countries. Right now, it's around 240 deaths due to COVID per 100,000. To put that in perspective, South Korea, our number of deaths per 100,000 for COVID is 13.5. And so it does come down to what number of deaths due to COVID is a country willing to tolerate. If they want to keep their death rates low, then of course restrictions will need to be tighter.
Right, and staying with the death rate, Dr. Kim, on the local front, Korea's soaring caseloads have yet to be reflected in its fatality numbers. How do you explain this silver lining of sorts?
Well, there are actually just two reasons for this kind of just a phenomenon. The first one is this specific the Omicron, and well, according to just a number of just several studies, compared to in contrast to the some earlier just the variants of just the SARS-CoV-2 viruses, the Omicron seems to just replicate only major just principally in the some upper respiratory tract of our just airways, but the other just previous just variants, their main just target area for just viral replication in the lung. So the location of the rapid just viral robust virus replication somehow correlates with the disease severity. So then that's why this is one of the reasons. And the secondly is the effect of the vaccination, including the booster shots. So although due to the just many just mutation, more than some dozens of mutations found in the spike protein, this Omicron variant seems to be very effective in evading just the antibody responses, actually, which is also induced by our just vaccination. But then still just the T cell response. This is the T cell response is actually what they do is that this T cell is actually destroy the infected cells. So the antibody main function of the antibody is actually just blocking the infection, but the T cell is actually just destroying the infected cell. So that's just preventing just further the spread of the viruses. So at least the T cell response is still just very robust and effective. And even without just the booster shot, according to just many just the studies, up until at least the 6 months, the T cell response is pretty just effective.
And that is very reassuring to know, of course. Dr. Dan, a third of all COVID-19 patients, that is, reportedly suffer from long COVID. Now, what has been shared about the long-term consequences of Omicron?
Well, we don't have a lot of information yet, simply because it's the latest variant of concern, and so it hasn't been around long enough to know. but the preliminary data seem to suggest that there's no reason to think that Omicron COVID makes people exempt from long-haul COVID symptoms. And I'm so glad that you brought this up because I don't think this is talked about enough in the media, long-haul COVID, post-acute COVID. In a study that was recently published in Nature Medicine, they highlighted some of the cardiovascular complications of COVID-19, and they included heart attack, arrhythmias, blood clots in the lung and in the veins of the leg, cardiogenic shock, heart failure. But beyond even the cardiovascular complications, we have documentation of COVID-19 in people who have symptoms long-term affecting every single organ system of the body. There are so many unanswered questions about what COVID-19 does long-term. We don't know why people are having symptoms a lot of times, and we don't know how to cure or manage really these patients. And so for anyone who thinks, oh, I heard Omicron is mild and everyone is going to get it at some time, I might as well just give up. I strongly urge you to reconsider because I don't want people to end up regretting having made that decision and living with long-term symptoms.
Right, which is why prevention should be our priority at the moment then. Dr. Kim, Novavax is now available to the public here. How effective do you expect this COVID-19 vaccine to be in our fight against Omicron?
Well, before just talking about the efficacy against the Omicron, I think we had better just talk about just the result of the phase 3 clinical trials of this Novavax vaccine. They actually Novavax actually just conducted the clinical trial. Phase 3 is from December 2020 to just February 2021. Over these 3 months, they actually just conducted tests almost about just 30,000 just people, and then the efficacy was actually just about just 90% just protection efficacy against the all kinds of COVID-19, which is including all mild disease and then moderate and the severe disease. But when we actually consider only just moderate or just a severe disease, the efficacy was 100%. But then we have to also consider during that the clinical trial, the major actually just the virus infection during that time was actually, according to their report, is mostly just a variant of interest and then variant of concern, but the predominant one is alpha variant. So at least now from this study, this is very effective against the alpha variant. But then there was actually very recent study just published in Cell by the San Diego research group, and they actually examined all the B cell response, which is actually just antibody responses and also the T cell responses against the some alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and then Omicron, and then from the Pfizer, Moderna, and then the J&J, and then now just Novavax vaccines. And then what they found out is, like I said earlier, just the T cell response is a major actually savior. In this case, for even just Novavax, this is completely different type of just the vaccine platform. They were very actually effective even just against the Omicron because of some of the T cell responses.
Right, I see. And staying with Novavax, Dr. Tan, what can you tell us about its efficacy when used in the manner of cross-inoculation?
Right. So, there are some people who just have a very difficult time tolerating an mRNA vaccine, and then there are others who have had documented severe adverse events after an mRNA vaccine, such as anaphylaxis, pericarditis, or myocarditis. So these are the people who would be good candidates for receiving Novavax as a booster dose. In terms of the data that support this, there was a COVI boost trial done in the UK, and they looked at the immunogenicity of using Novavax as a booster after having 2 shots of a Pfizer vaccine, so 2 shots of mRNA vaccine, but also they looked at 2 doses of AstraZeneca. And what they found was a booster using Novavax, a full dose of Novavax, showed very good levels of antibody boost response and also cellular immunity boost response with, and this is important, a very nice side effect profile. In other words, no real side effects to be concerned about. And so I think this is very good news because I know a lot of people who are reluctant to get that 3rd dose booster just because they had a bad experience with their either 1st or 2nd doses of an mRNA vaccine.
Right, and hopefully it will then further push up our vaccination rates. Dr. Kim, given the changes in our testing and tracing and treatment strategy in recent days, what do you suppose do we need to keep in mind as we continue to tackle Omicron?
Well, continue not only just about just Omicron, but generally over just the COVID-19, that this is SARS-CoV-2. I think, well, ultimately we have to think about, in the end, just return back to our just normal life. This is sort of just we are saying just living with the COVID-19. But regarding this, we have a couple of things that we actually have to consider. The first of all is, well, now we have very good just vaccines, but also just the virus is also changes. So in the end, just many experts just agree that this virus would just the viral infection would become just some endemic disease, like some common cold. Just the virus is causing common cold. And then in terms of this, we have to think about just how many just the human coronavirus have actually existed so far. There have been a total of the 7 the coronaviruses causing the human infectious disease. And that out of the 7, 3 actually cause very severe disease, including now just the SARS-CoV-2 and the original SARS-CoV-1 and also MERS coronavirus. But the other 4 coronavirus, once they might just cause very severe disease. When we actually look at back the some human history, just against the many of the infectious disease, but some of them actually now just become the very endemic, just the causative agent for some endemic diseases like some common cold. So in the end, we are actually expecting maybe this SARS-CoV-2 would become something like that. But also, well, in order for this way, we actually think about just some annual the vaccination, like a flu shot, and also just for this common cold coronavirus. Well, we are actually continually just being exposed to this common cold, but without any vaccination. But the thing is that some people say that our just frequent, well, not frequent, maybe it's occasional exposure to the maybe some future variant of SARS-CoV-2 might just play a role as some booster shot effect. So that's kind of a thing that we can actually think about. And also the other aspect that we can actually think about just the vaccination. We have now just many, well, sort of different kinds of the platform for just the vaccines. So that's actually a good thing. And then it can be actually developed for other potential just future infectious disease. And therefore the drugs, although now we have several, but we might have just expect just more just potential just antiviral drugs, not only for just the SARS-CoV-2, but also for other just very related coronavirus or potentially it's very broad spectrum antiviral drugs in the future.
Right, hopefully.
Yeah.
Dr. Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Dr. Tan, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this week's editions of the Daily Report. We'll be back on Monday. Do join us then. Thank you for now.